Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Israel Update. Today, I am going to be jumping back into something I started speaking about last year, but never actually got around to finishing because, as we know, last year was crazy. But I'm going to be jumping back, and throughout the course of this year, I'm going to be speaking to you again about the prophets. Now, obviously, we're going to be hearing more from Doobie. He just got back to Israel, thank God. He'd been in the States for a couple of months, and every time they tried to get back to Israel because of lockdowns and stuff, they weren't able to. But thank God they got there, they're safe. And so you'll be hearing from Doobie from back in our beautiful Holy Land very soon. But I want to jump in and speak to you for a couple of minutes today about the prophet Ezekiel. And we're going to be looking at Ezekiel's call, we're going to be looking at Ezekiel's conflict, and we're going to be looking at Ezekiel's cost. And these are kind of the themes that we're going to look at when we're looking at different prophets. And then, of course, you know, a lot of the time we sort of know the outcome of what it was that God did through their lives. But I want to look at them in a personal capacity. It's a little bit different looking at the prophets this way. Very often it's message-based, it's more thematic. And what I want to look at is the personal elements of what it would have been like, I imagine, for prophets like Ezekiel. So we're going to jump in here. Ezekiel's call. This is one of the first things that God said to him. Chapter 2, Son of man, stand up on your feet and I will speak to you. As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. Now this is verse 3. He said, Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. Dropping down, verse 6. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you, and you live among scorpions. Now jumping over to chapter 3, verse 4. He then said to me, Son of man, go now to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech and difficult language, but to the house of Israel, not to many peoples of obscure speech and difficult language, whose words you cannot understand. And then he says, this is God speaking to Ezekiel still, surely if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the house of Israel is not willing to listen to you because they are not willing to listen to me, for the whole house is hardened and obstinate. Verse 8, this is a key. But I will make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. So right out of the gate, as we start, the first thing that God says, Ezekiel has a vision in chapter 1, but then God comes, and the title of it, even in the Bible that I'm using, is Ezekiel's call. So the call that God gives him is, Ezekiel, I am sending you to a group of people that are not obscure or foreign. They're people whose language you understand, who are going to understand you, but they are difficult, they are obstinate, they are stubborn, and guess what? They're not going to listen to you. Imagine that being your call. That's the call of God right out of the gate. This is what I'm going to do with you. This is what I'm going to do with your life. Also, no one's going to listen to you. A little bit rough, right? Yes, that was Ezekiel's call. Now, there's all these other things that happened. And because these segments are always so much shorter, I don't have time to get into the details of this, but we are going to be starting up a teaching channel at some point on the House of Destiny, and that's something that I'm going to be able to dig into in a lot more depth, where those will be much longer sermons, really kind of getting stuck into what it is that God was saying and doing. But so this is Ezekiel's call. I'm sending you to a group of people. They're difficult. They're not going to want to listen to you. They're not going to listen to you. So that's Ezekiel's call. Then we see Ezekiel's conflict. All right. Now, somebody who's a prophet, there's this strange mystery that often occurs within a prophet where they see things, they're called to speak out what's wrong, but they're also often moved by a very intense compassion that causes this sort of duality in them, because they see destruction coming or they see a warning, but they also see the souls and the people, and there's this care connect that happens. It's something that I even saw with Kim very often. But here in Ezekiel chapter 10, verse 13. Now, as I was prophesying, Pelatiah, son of Benaiah, died. Then I fell face down and cried out in a loud voice, "Ah, sovereign Lord, will you completely destroy the remnant of Israel?" And so we see here Ezekiel's prophesying between chapters 3 and chapters 10. All these different things are happening. This is where God has said, Ezekiel, you're going to be a sign. In chapter 4, you need to lie on your one side for 390 days to symbolize the captivity of Israel. Then you need to lie on your side for 40 days to symbolize the captivity of Judah. And during this time, you're going to be bound with ropes, and you're going to eat this tiny amount of food, and you're going to make it this way. way. And we just start seeing there's just these different things that Ezekiel has to deal with in terms of cost, which we're going to look at in a moment. But his conflict came where, imagine what that would have been like as a prophet standing there as he was prophesying. Somebody falls down and dies because the presence and power of God is so strong, and the message that he's bringing as the mouthpiece of the voice of God, as the message of God, somebody falls down and dies. Now, in today's day and age, I think there'd probably be a little bit of celebrating if that happened. If it was a certain group of people that perhaps collapsed in the middle of a prophecy, some of us would maybe go like, wow, this is really like, God's kind of vindicating us. But Ezekiel's heart was broken, and he was conflicted about it because he cared so deeply about people, even the ones who weren't doing the right thing. And even in that, we see the heart of God, because God cares for every person. In a different chapter, in Ezekiel Chapter 18, it says, every living soul belongs to me. The Father and the Son alike, they both belong to me. And God cares for all of us the same way, all of us. So Ezekiel's call, difficult house of Israel. Ezekiel's conflict, he cares about the people even when the result of his prophecy is part of the will of God, but it brings him some degree of pain because he cares about the people. And that's his conflict. And then Ezekiel's cost. He was a prophet. I feel like he had the most burdensome of costs, even though as we continue and look at different ones, we'll see that every single one of them did indeed bear a cost. But I spoke briefly about that a couple moments ago, about how lying on your one side, imagine just lying there tied with ropes, 390 days. What do? Just to be a sign to a rebellious group of people who aren't listening to you anyway. And this is part of the cost that Ezekiel bore in order to be the mouthpiece for God's voice. But this is the kicker for me. In Ezekiel Chapter 24, verse 15, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, with one blow, I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes. Yet do not lament or weep or shed any tears. Groan quietly, do not mourn for the dead. Keep your turban fastened and your sandals on your feet. Do not cover the lower part of your face or eat the customary food of mourners. This verse might be, for me, one of the most intense verses in the whole of Scripture. Ezekiel Chapter 24, 18. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and in the evening my wife died. The next morning I did as I had been commanded. So often when we're reading through Scripture, we can read something and it just feels like, it's a verse, and we continue. But if you stop and imagine what it must have been like for Ezekiel in that moment, God identifies that Ezekiel's wife means the most to him. Son of man, in one blow, I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes. God was acknowledging, Ezekiel, I know your wife is the delight of your eyes, but in order to be a sign as part of your call, you're going to have to face a conflict because of your cost. And in this moment, in this brief, I don't know how long it was, other than it's saying, I spoke to the people in the morning, and in the evening my wife died. Then the next morning I got up and did as I had been commanded. What would it have been like for Ezekiel that evening? Knowing God spoke to him, knowing that then his wife died, and then the next morning he got up and did the thing that God had told him to do. That is such an intense thing for me to imagine. And it's something I've thought about so often over the years, is just the cost. And I don't know why that is exactly what God chose to do, other than to say that God was saying that in verse 24, it says, Ezekiel will be a sign to you. You will do just as he has done. And when this happens, you will know that I am the sovereign Lord. So Ezekiel's life was a sign. The things that he had to do were a sign to this group of people to whom he was called, and because of whom he was conflicted, and because of whom he had to pay such an intense cost. But the outcome of this is that some of what Ezekiel prophesied, we're still waiting to see fulfilled today. So what God chose to reveal through this man, through this prophet, we are seeing some of the fulfillment happened already. Ezekiel Chapter 37, the valley of dry bones, that was fulfilled post-Holocaust. That happened between 1945 and 1948. We're in a moment in fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8, can a nation be born in a day? It happened on May the 14th, 1948. Ezekiel Chapter 37 about the valley of dry bones was speaking about the remnant of Israel that would rise from the ashes of the Holocaust. Think about that, prophesying thousands of years ago, but because of this call and this conflict and this cost, we are living in a time where we're still seeing some of what Ezekiel prophesied unfolding. Now, you might think, okay, well, that's great, but what does that have to do with me? Well, there are still things that apply to us. There is a call on each of us, and the question is, what is it? What has God called us to? Most of us are not prophets. God didn't design it that way, but each of us has a call. And each of us will have a conflict surrounding that call, and each of us will have a cost to pay in order to see that call fulfilled. And so I don't know where you're at. I don't know what's going on in your life. I do know that for those of us that would probably call ourselves conservatives, there's a lot of conflict right now in the nation and in everything that we're seeing going on around us. That my encouragement to you is not to lose heart, not to lose hope, not to drop your eyes and think, oh, well, God's done with me. He's not. His call remains, it stands firm. His election is sure, it's complete. What he desires for your life has not gone away just because politics aren't the way we would maybe want them to be. So my encouragement to you today, just in thinking about what it was that Ezekiel had to go through. And like I said, when we do the teaching channel, I'm going to really dig into his prophecies and the signs and the things that he did, but that's for another time. But for today, in this short little amount of time, I just want to encourage you. The call of God still remains for you. There will be conflict, there will be cost, but just think about what our obedience could accomplish. Because Ezekiel's obedience has accomplished something that is so much greater than anything I think he could have ever imagined, because we're here thousands of years after the fact, thousands of years after he prophesied these things, and we're still waiting for chapters 38 and 39 of Ezekiel to be fulfilled, and I think they're just around the corner. So think about that in your context. What is it that God has called you to? What is the conflict you're facing? What is the cost you think God might be asking you to pay? But also know that the consequence or the outcome could be so much bigger than anything you could have possibly dared, hoped, or dreamed possible. And so today, I pray that whatever it is you're facing, God would help you to lift your eyes, not be surrounded by the things that we're seeing. And my prayer for you is that sight would not hinder your vision today. That is, the things that you see will not take away from the vision that God has given you, for the vision that God has for you. And so wherever you're at, I pray for peace to be upon you this week. And I pray that God's calling would be made manifest inside of your being, and that you would know like you know what it is that he's calling you to, and that you would have the grace to walk it out. And that is my prayer for you today, this Friday. As always, every Friday we're here, israelupdate.org. Make sure you come back next week. I'm going to be continuing on with the prophets, and of course we'll be hearing from Doobie as always. So I say God bless you, Shabbat Shalom, and have a beautiful week.